Who are the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Clarence 13X? And what's their relationship to hip-hop? Professor Bunby has given you a sense of where we are, and he shared some information concerning this mosque. So I won't repeat that, but I do want you to know that it represents a very important tradition in the life of the United States. In fact, it's safe to say that Islam is as old as the United States. Why do I say that? I say that because scholars argue anywhere between 5% and 25% of the enslaved Africans who are brought to the Americas are Muslim. And some of those Muslims are brought to North America. There are diary accounts, other historical evidence that suggests this presence. And so it's an extremely important tradition. It will grow in size, it will grow in detail and depth over the course of the centuries until we reach what we currently have. Millions of folks in the United States committed to Islam. What you're probably most familiar with are the 5 pillars of Islam. Let me summarize those for you. First, the oneness of God. The idea that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. The second involves prayer 5 times a day. The third involves giving to those in need, roughly 2.5% of one's income. The fourth involves fasting and self-control during the holy month of Ramadan. And the fifth is pilgrimage to Mecca for those who are economically and physically capable. So you're probably pretty familiar with Sunni Islam. What we want to talk about today are some other developments that you may not be as familiar with. Now, this is charged and this can be a tense conversation. It's important that you keep in mind that Prof and I are not advocates of any particular religious system. We are not arguing over whether or not these traditions are orthodox. We're simply presenting them the way adherents understand them. That said, the two that we're interested in during our time together today are the Nation of Islam and the 5% Nation. The story of the Nation of Islam is lodged in Detroit. There's a gentleman who's going around black communities door to door and he's selling goods. Now this is the Great Depression and he's selling goods, fine silks and other items. Now most of the African Americans he encountered were not really interested in those items. They were barely making ends meet. But what they were interested in were the stories, the narrative he provided. He told them that their condition had nothing to do with them, that they were descendants of greatness. He told them that they really needed to change their diet in order to maximize their mental capabilities and become what they were destined to be. He argued they needed to stop eating slave foods, no more pork, for example. He gave them so much information that extended their history beyond slavery to a glorious past, and people loved it. It reached a point where it was difficult for him to have these conversations in homes because of the interest. So they established another location. And they would come to call this gathering the Nation of Islam. This gentleman, Master Farad Muhammad, was the center of this movement. One of those who's really intrigued by these teachings is Elijah Poole, a transplant from Georgia who moves to Detroit looking for economic opportunities that will make his family more comfortable. He eventually goes to one of the services and he hears what Master Farad Muhammad is saying, and for him it is just mind-blowing. It alters how he thinks about himself and how he thinks about life, how he thinks about future possibilities. He understands that Master Farad Muhammad is just not only a great man, but a unique and supreme being, something along the lines of a Christ figure. He becomes associated with this movement and over a short period of time gains a prominent role. Then 1934, Master Farad Muhammad disappears, just gone. And as you might imagine, there's a bit of a power struggle within this growing Nation of Islam. Elijah Poole, now Elijah Muhammad, leaves Detroit and begins to spread word of these teachings. and the nation will grow and grow and grow. And it begins to hit a high point when Malcolm Little decides that this is the religion that will change his life. While he's in prison, he converts. He comes out, leaves behind his slave name. We've talked about that X. You'll recall what we said about the X. His name is changed from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X, and the nation grows. Now, some of the teachings that were prominent within the nation that really got the attention of a larger U.S. population included these points. Those within the nation should not live to eat, but should eat to live. Eat once a day with family. They were obligated to be involved in the life of the community in an intense and sustained way. He argued that members of the Nation of Islam had to be involved in family structure in a way that was solid. The traditional nuclear family is what he pushed. He also argued that it would reach a point in human history when Master Fard Muhammad would return, the earth would be purged of nastiness and the original people would be restored to their greatness. He argued the original people then would control the universe. Some wondered why the Nation of Islam wanted its members to have a sense of the distance between the earth and the sun, for example. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad argued, if you rule a universe, you ought to know something about its makeup. Let me give you one more point. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad argued that because blacks could not expect to receive justice in the context of the United States, what they needed to develop was a nation within a nation. This is what he meant, that the United States should give his people support for 25 years and prime property in the South, and then just leave them alone to be about their own business. A nation within a nation. And that those who were a part of this nation within a nation would live out their principles, the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as constituted by the Nation of Islam. They would live this out until Master Fard Muhammad returned and purged the world. In the early 1960s in New York City, Clarence 13X leaves the Nation of Islam. Now, why he leaves is open to discussion and debate. But he leaves the Nation of Islam and begins to form another organization that appealed to young people in Harlem. Clarence 13X says, no, the original people weren't simply created by Allah, they are gods. And he takes this term, Allah, and pulls it apart and says, this is what it represents. Arm, leg, arm, head. That divinity is lodged within human flesh in a way that makes them indistinguishable. Black men are gods, and black women are earths. They are the producers of life. Their teachings revolve heavily around mathematics and the deconstruction of words. For example, knowledge. From the perspective of 5%ers, knowledge involves this: know the ledge, or the library. That's the location where they bury the lies. Words can be pulled apart, and if you understand how they are constructed, if you understand how to decipher them, you gain a wealth of information. And much of their activity involves a rehearsing of the supreme knowledge that makes them who they are. The community that Clarence 13X, who's also known as Father Allah, develops comes to be called the 5% Nation. Now let me give you a bit of information concerning the story behind this name. Members of this community argue that 85% of the population was without knowledge, just blindly following whomever. 10% of the population has proper knowledge but doesn't share it. Nation of Islam. That leaves 5% who are poor righteous teachers providing proper understanding and proper knowledge. Now, within the teachings of this community, there is a deep preoccupation with the meaning of words, how words are pulled apart and what they actually entail. So, for example, the argument that these folks are actually gods stems from the term Allah. And they argue Allah really stands for this: arm, leg, arm, head. The community is rather loosely configured and typically revolves around two locations: Mecca, which is Harlem, Medina, which is Brooklyn. And there's a process of sharing information. There's a process of sharing the mathematics that really helps members of this community unpack life to help them answer those fundamental questions of human existence. Who are we? What are we? Why are we? Where are we? So over the course of your listening to hip hop and listening to other conversations, you may have heard things like this: "What up, G?" And you may initially think, well, what they mean by that is, "What up, gangster?" No. This grows out of the teachings of the 5% Nation. What you are doing when you use that phrase is recognizing the divinity of the other. What up, God? Bits and pieces of the teachings of the 5% Nation have infiltrated culture. It has had influence beyond its numbers. The same can be said about the Nation of Islam. We don't really know how many folks are in the Nation of Islam. We don't really know how many 5%ers there are, but we do have a sense that their influence is substantial. And as Professor Bun B has pointed out, it has influenced and informed hip-hop in really creative and interesting ways. There's one last point I'd like to make, and it's this: both the Nation of Islam and the 5% Nation have been creative and aggressive in terms of getting their message across. And they've done this in a variety of ways. One, through papers, through books, through conversations. They've reached into areas of life and institutions where churches and other religious communities have been hard-pressed to venture. So, for example, the Nation of Islam has done tremendous work within the prison system. They've been committed to spreading these teachings in a variety of impactful ways, trying to reach those that they believe need this material most. And they've done this in a way that is sensitive to the cultural shifts and nuances of life within the United States. So, we've talked a bit about the history and the doctrines of Sunni Islam, the Nation of Islam, and the 5% Nation. Professor Bun B has added to that conversation really good insights and information concerning how these traditions influence and inform hip-hop culture. So you have a basic working knowledge now, but you may still have questions and concerns that haven't been answered yet. So you know what to do. Check out the bonus reel.